The lecture hall of the Galactic Academy was unusually full. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of star systems sat in curved rows beneath a bright glass dome. Sunlight streamed through the transparent ceiling, reflecting off silver desks and polished uniforms. Most of the cadets looked bored. Some looked annoyed. A few looked insulted. At the center of the room stood Professor Veron, a respected historian whose lessons normally focused on advanced civilizations, interstellar diplomacy, and ancient galactic empires. Today, however, the title displayed behind him caused groans across the hall. Human History, Mandatory Introductory Course. A blue-skinned cadet raised his hand. Professor, with respect, why are we studying humans? Several students nodded. Another cadet laughed. They only joined the Galactic Union 50 years ago. Exactly, someone else added. Their technology is average. Their lifespan is short. Their planet isn't even that remarkable. The room filled with quiet agreement. Professor Veron waited patiently. Then he smiled. That reaction, he said, is precisely why this course is mandatory. The room became silent. A reptilian cadet named Korth folded his arms. Humans are newcomers. Surely there are more important civilizations to study. Professor Veron touched a control panel. A giant image of Earth appeared behind him. A small blue world floating in darkness. Tell me, the professor said, how many of you believe humans became members of the Galactic Union because they developed advanced technology? Almost every hand went up. The professor nodded. Incorrect. Several cadets exchanged confused looks. What? Korth asked. Then how did they qualify? The professor's smile disappeared. That's what we're here to learn. The room grew quieter. The first slide appeared. A timeline stretching thousands of years. Human civilization began much like countless others, Veron explained. Tribes, kingdoms, conflicts, discoveries.
A feline cadet yawned. So far, nothing special. Indeed, said the professor. Then he advanced to the next slide. The image changed to a battlefield. Smoke, fire,
destruction.
Millions of tiny figures moving across ruined landscapes. What is this? Someone asked. The First World War. Several cadets stared. How many species participated? One asked. One. The room blinked. What? One species, Veron repeated.
Humans.
A murmur spread through the hall. Korth frowned. They fought themselves? Yes. Against their own kind? Yes. The professor advanced another slide. A second war appeared. Larger, deadlier. Entire cities reduced to rubble. Then this must be another species.
No.
The professor's voice remained calm. Still humans. The room became noticeably quieter. Casualties? Asked a student. Professor Veron answered. The number appeared on the screen. The hall erupted. That's impossible. That can't be correct. No civilization survives losses like that. Professor Veron allowed the reactions to continue. Eventually he raised a hand. The room settled. Your response mirrors that of every class before you. Korth stared at the screen. They nearly destroyed themselves. Several times, Veron replied. The reptilian cadet looked genuinely disturbed. Then why weren't they extinct? The professor changed slides again. This time the images were different. Scientists, engineers, doctors, farmers, teachers, families rebuilding cities, children attending schools, communities recovering. The contrast was striking. Because every time they fell, Veron said softly, they rebuilt. The room watched silently. After wars came innovation. New images appeared. Computers, medical breakthroughs, spacecraft, scientific discoveries, technological revolutions. After disaster came progress. Another slide. Human astronauts standing on a distant moon. A collective gasp spread through the audience. They reached another world before achieving planetary unity? A cadet asked. Correct. Why? Professor Veron smiled again. Humans rarely wait for perfect conditions. Some students laughed. Others looked thoughtful. The professor continued. They explored oceans before understanding them. A new image appeared. They climbed mountains without practical reason. Another image. They crossed deserts, polar regions, and dangerous seas simply because they wished to know what existed beyond the horizon. The room grew increasingly attentive. What drove them? Asked a student. Professor Veron considered the question. Curiosity. The answer seemed too simple, yet nobody challenged it. The professor dimmed the lights. The final image appeared. Earth viewed from space. Small, fragile, alone. This world possessed countless reasons to fail. The room remained silent. Climate disasters, wars, resource shortages, political divisions. He paused. Yet somehow they endured. For the first time, nobody looked bored. Even Korth leaned forward. Professor Veron folded his hands behind his back. And everything we've discussed today occurred before humanity ever discovered faster-than-light travel. A stunned silence followed. Several cadets exchanged nervous glances. Wait, one finally said. You're saying this was only their beginning? The professor nodded. Everything you've seen happened before humanity entered the galactic stage. The room suddenly felt smaller. The students no longer looked amused. They looked concerned. Professor Veron deactivated the display. Tomorrow, he said, we will examine the era that earned humanity its first classified designation within galactic archives. A cadet raised a trembling hand. What designation? The professor looked at the class. For the first time all lesson, his expression was completely serious. The species that refused extinction. The bell rang. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And for the first time since entering the lecture hall, not a single cadet questioned why the course was mandatory. Because they had just learned one unsettling fact. Human history was not the story of a civilization that succeeded. It was the story of a civilization that survived. And somehow that was far more frightening.
The next morning, every seat in the lecture hall was occupied. Not a single cadet was absent. Professor Veron noticed immediately. Normally, attendance dropped after the first day of any mandatory course. Not this one. The giant dome above the classroom glowed with soft morning light as hundreds of alien cadets waited in unusual silence. Yesterday, they had entered the hall believing humanity was an insignificant newcomer. Today, they wanted answers. Professor Veron stepped onto the platform. Behind him appeared a single line of text. The species that refused extinction. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even Korth sat upright. The professor studied the room. Yesterday, you learned that humanity survived devastating wars. He paused. Today, you will learn that war was not humanity's greatest enemy. A few cadets exchanged confused glances. If not war, asked Korth, what was? The professor activated the display. Earth appeared again, but this time it looked different. Ancient, violent, unforgiving. Nature. The room fell silent. Massive storms appeared across the hologram. Volcanoes erupted. Earthquakes split continents. Entire regions froze beneath ice. Several cadets stared. This was their home, one asked. Yes. Why didn't they leave? Professor Veron smiled. They couldn't. The student blinked. They were trapped there. For most of their history, the room became noticeably quieter. The professor enlarged the image. A small human settlement appeared. Primitive buildings surrounded by wilderness. Tiny compared to the world around them. Imagine living on a planet where predators can kill you. Another image appeared, where weather can destroy your home. Another, where disease can wipe out entire populations. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. Most intelligent species evolve in relatively stable environments. The professor looked around the room. Humans did not. A murmur spread through the audience. Korth narrowed his eyes. No. The professor's answer surprised everyone. They adapted repeatedly. The next slide appeared. Ancient humans crossing frozen landscapes. Then sailors crossing dangerous oceans. Then explorers traversing deserts. Then astronauts standing on the moon. The images moved rapidly. Century after century. Challenge after challenge. Obstacle after obstacle. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Every disaster was followed by adaptation. Every setback was followed by progress. Every failure was followed by another attempt. A blue-skinned cadet raised her hand. Professor, yes. How many times did humanity nearly go extinct? The professor became very quiet. Then he answered, more than once. The room froze. What? Several voices spoke simultaneously. Professor Veyron enlarged a section of the timeline. Natural disasters. Another marker appeared. Pandemics. Another. Global conflicts. Another. Economic collapses. Another. Environmental crises. The timeline continued. The cadets stared. The list seemed endless. Any one of these events would have ended many civilizations, Veyron said. Yet humans survived all of them. The silence grew heavier. Korth slowly leaned forward. How? The professor looked directly at him. That question has occupied historians for centuries. The room waited. Humans possess an unusual trait. What trait? The professor enlarged a single word. Persistence. Some cadets looked confused. Others looked disappointed. Persistence. Korth repeated. That's it. Professor Veyron nodded. That is it. The reptilian cadet frowned. That doesn't sound impressive. The professor smiled. Then allow me to demonstrate. A new image appeared. The first human-powered aircraft. A fragile machine made of wood and fabric. The room examined it. It barely flies, someone said. Correct. The next image appeared. A modern aircraft crossing the sky. Several cadets blinked. The professor advanced again. Primitive computers, then interplanetary spacecraft, then faster-than-light vessels. The progression continued. What are we looking at? Asked a student. Failure. The room looked confused. Professor Veyron continued. Every successful invention shown here was preceded by countless failures. The image changed. Failed prototypes. Broken machines. Destroyed experiments. Abandoned projects. The list stretched for pages. The cadets stared. Why didn't they stop? Someone asked. Professor Veyron laughed softly. Humans rarely stop because something fails. The room grew quiet again. Many species view failure as evidence that a goal is impossible. The professor paused. Humans often view failure as evidence that they are getting closer. A wave of disbelief swept through the lecture hall. That makes no sense. It doesn't have to, said Veyron. It works. The display suddenly changed. A classified galactic archive symbol appeared. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Several cadets straightened in their seats. Even Korth looked nervous. The professor's expression became serious. 43 years ago, humanity made first contact with the Galactic Union. The room watched carefully. This was the moment they had been waiting for. A star map appeared. Several advanced civilizations surrounded a tiny marker labeled Earth. The Galactic Council expected humans to behave like most young species. Professor Veyron paused. They did not. A few cadets exchanged uncertain glances. What happened? Korth asked. The professor folded his hands. The council identified a dangerous region of space known as the Abyss Frontier. A dark section appeared on the star map. Unstable stars, gravitational anomalies, frequent ship losses. The room watched silently. No member species wanted to explore it. The professor zoomed in. Humans volunteered. Several cadets laughed. Then they realized the professor was serious. The laughter died immediately. They volunteered? Someone whispered. Why? Professor Veyron smiled. The same answer appeared again. Curiosity. The room stared at the word. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. Because they were beginning to understand something deeply unsettling. Humans did not survive because they were the strongest. They survived because they refused to quit. And whenever the galaxy encountered something dangerous, humans seemed strangely eager to investigate it. The professor deactivated the display. Tomorrow, he said quietly, we will examine what humanity discovered beyond the Abyss Frontier. For the first time since the course began, a cadet stood up. It wasn't Korth. It wasn't one of the skeptics. It was an honor student from the Academy's exploration program. His face looked pale. Professor. Yes. The student swallowed. What if the council should have stopped them? The room became completely silent. Professor Veyron looked at him. Then he smiled. That, he said, is exactly what happened. The lecture hall was silent before Professor Veyron even arrived. No conversations. No jokes. No dismissive comments. The alien cadets sat waiting beneath the Academy's glass dome, their attention fixed on the empty platform. 3 days ago, most of them had considered humanity unremarkable. Now they weren't so sure. The doors opened. Professor Veyron entered. Immediately, the room straightened. He activated the central display. A star map appeared. At its center was a vast black region, the abyss frontier, the dangerous area of space no civilization had wanted to explore, the place humans had volunteered to enter. Veyron looked around the room. Today, he said, we discussed the event that changed humanity's reputation forever. The room became completely still. Korth raised his hand. What did they find? The professor smiled. That depends on how you look at it. A few confused glances spread across the hall. The display zoomed into the dark region. 43 years ago, the Galactic Council authorized a small human exploration mission. A tiny fleet appeared on the map. Only 3 ships. Several cadets looked surprised. 3 ships, one asked. That's all. That is all humanity requested, Veyron replied. The room exchanged uncertain looks. The ships entered the abyss frontier. The display followed them. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Communication became irregular. Several unexplained anomalies appeared. Entire sectors of space seemed distorted. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably. Sensors malfunctioned. Navigation systems failed. The room watched carefully. Most species would have turned back, Veyron said. Humans did not. Of course they didn't, Korth thought. The realization annoyed him. Human behavior was becoming strangely predictable. Every time logic suggested retreat, humans moved forward. The display continued. Then something happened. The lead vessel detected a signal. Ancient, artificial, unknown. The lecture hall became noticeably quieter. A cadet near the front leaned forward. A signal from who? Professor Veyron answered. Nobody knew. The display showed the human crew debating. Several officers argued for caution. Others argued for investigation. The debate lasted less than an hour. The room watched the conclusion. The humans followed the signal. Several cadets groaned. Of course they did. Laughter spread through the hall. For the first time in days. Even Professor Veyron smiled. Yes, he said. Of course they did. The fleet reached the source. The display revealed a massive structure hidden within a gravitational anomaly. The room collectively inhaled. The structure was enormous. Far larger than any known vessel. Ancient beyond measurement. Silent. Waiting. An abandoned station? Asked a student. No. The professor's expression became serious. It was a warning beacon. The room froze. A warning for what? Veyron changed the display. The beacon activated. Ancient recordings appeared. Unknown symbols. Unknown languages. Unknown civilizations. Thousands of them. The room watched in stunned silence. Every species represented here is extinct, said Veyron. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The statement felt impossible. The professor continued. For millions of years, advanced civilizations encountered the same threat. The display shifted again. A dark region appeared beyond the mapped galaxy. Not an empire. Not a species. Something else. Something ancient. Something vast. Several cadets looked uncomfortable. What is it? Someone whispered. Professor Veyron shook his head. Even now, we don't fully know. The room stared at the image. The ancient recordings explained only one thing. Whenever intelligent life reached a certain level of development, the threat appeared. Entire civilizations vanished. Again, and again, and again. A chill spread across the lecture hall. Korth swallowed. Then why are we still here? The question hung in the air. Professor Veyron nodded. An excellent question. The display changed. Human ships appeared again. The tiny exploration fleet. 3 ships facing knowledge that had terrified entire civilizations. The room watched silently. What did they do? A cadet asked. Professor Veyron laughed softly. Several students looked confused. Professor. I'm sorry, Veyron said. It's just that every class asks the same question. He pointed toward the display. What do humans always do? The room understood instantly. Several cadets sighed. Others shook their heads. Korth buried his face in his hands. They investigated. Correct. The room erupted with reluctant laughter. The answer was ridiculous and completely predictable. The humans investigated. They studied the beacon, mapped the anomalies, recovered data, explored deeper, much deeper, far deeper than the Galactic Council had authorized. The laughter slowly disappeared. The display showed years passing. The tiny mission became a larger expedition, then a permanent research operation, then an international effort involving multiple human governments. Humanity wasn't running. Humanity was preparing. The room watched with growing unease. They believed the threat was real? Asked a student. Yes. And they stayed anyway? Yes. Nobody understood. Most species would have evacuated. Most species would have hidden. Most species would have hoped someone else solved the problem. Humans built research stations, then shipyards, then defensive networks. The room stared in disbelief. They were preparing for war. Professor Veron nodded. They were preparing for survival. Silence filled the hall. The professor looked around the room. 20 years later, the threat finally appeared. The display changed. A dark object emerged from deep space. Massive, ancient, terrifying. Several cadets stopped breathing. The image alone felt wrong. Unnatural. Predatory. The room watched humanity's response. Not panic. Not surrender. Not retreat. Not away from it. The lecture hall became completely silent. Professor Veron deactivated the display. The room sat motionless. Finally, Korth spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. What happened next? The professor smiled. The same smile he had worn on the first day. The smile of someone who knew a secret. What happened next, he said, is the reason humanity was offered permanent membership in the Galactic Union. The room leaned forward. Every cadet, every student, every future officer, waiting. Professor Veron folded his hands behind his back. The threat that erased thousands of civilizations never reached the galaxy. Silence. Absolute silence. Then realization spread across the room. One cadet stood. No. Another shook his head. Humans couldn't have. Korth stared at the professor. For the first time since the course began, he genuinely looked afraid. Professor Veron's smile widened. Oh, they absolutely did. The bell rang. Nobody moved. Nobody cared. Because the story was over. And every cadet in the room finally understood why some students had withdrawn from the course years earlier. Human history wasn't inspiring. It was terrifying. Because whenever the impossible appeared, humans had a habit of walking directly toward it.